So my name's Eric Sarver. I do own KOAM Outdoors throughout Kansas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Missouri. I do a lot of videotaping of my hunting and fishing trips. We've got a lot going on. We've got some nonprofit organizations I heavily involve kids in. But for this particular event, what we're going to be doing is talking about the Foodplot implements and kind of going through the steps. So we'll be covering implements, the steps into planning, the fall timing, seed blends, maintenance of your food plots in regards to spraying, as well as any kind of fertilizer, liming with your pH level. It is so imperative that when you first get into food plots to understand what your soil is. And before we even start with the presentation here, I do want to definitely isolate that particular item. And liming of your food plot can be crucial. You don't have to do it every year, but it is a good idea in regards to go ahead and understand what your pH level is. You have multiple avenues of doing that. In regards to what I would highly recommend is doing a soil sample, send it into your state, and then also retrieve that data. That will give you your pH level, and then you kind of go from there in regards to the amount of lime that you've got to put on your food plot. And then after that, depending on what your food plot seed is and the growth rate, then you can start putting in your fertilizer. So I'll first talk about how I got into the food plot aspect. I was the young man that came out there. We didn't have, we had the farm machinery, we had the equipment, but my dad, my grandfather, my uncles, they didn't really trust me. So I got to be the weed eater guy. And I first started out with small food plots there, and I weeded down to the ground, I sprayed it, and I threw it out. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. But I was 12, 13 years old at that point in time, and over time, I've really grown to understand what it truly takes in regards to getting a good quality food plot from the start all the way to the finish. So we'll move on to the next slide here. So these are a lot of my partners in the industry. I use a Swisher rough cut, and as we progress through this, you'll see I use a lot of implements that can be used with an ATV, UTV-like setup. And I like to represent probably the most common or the easiest way to get these kind of implements. A lot of you guys probably own four-wheelers or UTVs. A lot of you guys probably own tractors. So the concept's going to be the same, but you guys will see a lot of ATV, UTV type implements that come through here. So I roll with the Swisher Rough Cut. They're out of Warrensburg, Missouri. A great product there in regards to covering any kind of cutting fields or trail systems. It's kind of an all-in-one really good package for me in regards to durability, and that way I can load this thing up with my ATV or my UTV on a trailer, and I'm ready to rock and roll. My next one is the CF Moto ATV there. Been a rock solid. It's a 500 cc, and I'm able to haul any kind of implement there you guys see on the screen in that. I've also got a Polaris Ranger 1000 North Star, and that's the system right here with my workhorse sprayer. If you guys are looking at sprayers, I know Nixa's got a whole bunch of sprayers out here. The next item is going to be Teflon disc, and this is by far probably the best implement that I've found in regards to being able to disc a particular food plot, if that's the direction you guys want to plant. And then the next one is Swisher Spreader. So basically your seed spreader. One thing I do use that I didn't actually include on this PowerPoint is the Earthway. These spreaders are rock solid. You can get the cheap one from Walmart, may last you a year or two, but the turning, they'll start snapping. There's something about, I don't know if they're cheaply made, I'm not quite sure, but the Earthways are rock solid spreaders. So if you guys need a spreader, I know they for sure have them here for sale. And then the last item is the drag harrow. So what this is going to be used for is basically after I go back in there and seed, I'm going to drag that field, and that way I get good seed to soil contact in regards. And I'll discuss that a little bit further in regards to multiple avenues you can use that drag harrow depending on what the ground is. All right, so my steps here, again, we're going through the Swisher rough cut. I usually cut a month before I plan to plant. Sometimes if you plant earlier and we don't have the rain, I don't need to come back through there and actually cut. So I'll skip that step and I'll go right into the spraying. But basically if you are going to go ahead and need to cut that field or whatever, allow 2 weeks. That way you got that growth of that grass to grow, whatever it is, then come in there and kill that stuff off with that 41% glyphosate. And then after that, I'll come back in there a couple weeks later. I like to separate everything out about 2 weeks. I found that that's pretty best to kind of let everything work itself out there. And then after that, I'll come in there with the tough line disc and go ahead and work that ground. I will touch on a little bit in regards to different ways if you're not, wanting to do a tiller or a disc, but here in a minute. But after that, what I'll end up doing, I'll come in there with either the Earthway or the Swisher spreader and go ahead and get the stuff spread. And I like to time that as close as I possibly can to the rain. If I'm seeing some rain the next couple hours, I'm going to try to make the trip. Sometimes especially some of these states that I've got to travel 4 or 6 hours away, I can't be everywhere at the same spot, right? So what ends up happening is I will go ahead, if I see some rain, some heavy rain in the forecast, I'll go ahead and broadcast the stuff out there, and then just hope it hits. It's just going to take the 3 different things. Is you're going to have good quality seed or soil. You're going to have a great seed, which Nixa hardware provides great seed and all those products, and then rain to get this stuff going. And then after that, I'll drag it, and that way I've got that good seed to soil contact. So additional ways to spray. You can spray it, then you can disc the ground, and you can come in there with a drill. And I've done that a time or two before. We have a lot of farm ground in Kansas. That's the way that they plant, a lot of their crops, and that seems to work out very well. And then after that, the spray and then the no-till drill. A lot of times that works out very well. It's a great way to eliminate the necessary tilling of it. So you can go in there and cut it, spray it, then go in there with your no-till drill, and that works out very well. The one thing you really got to keep in mind in regards to those no-till is you're going to start pulling out some money. The big names out there, RTP drill, those are great products with the crimpers, and then followed up with the no-till drill. But you're looking, around 20 grand for a good quality setup there to get into that. So, this system right here, it's a proven method. I've done it for over a decade. It works very well. And the biggest thing, on Foodplots is making sure that you've got that seed to soil contact. So, going to the third one, spraying it again, and then fire. Make sure if you're going to mess with fire, make sure you got enough people that you're going to take care of it. Make sure you make the proper calls to whoever you need to, depending on what state and county you're in. And then the last one there is the crimping and drill. As I mentioned earlier, RTP's got a great setup there in regards to crimping the grass, basically what that's rolling over, all of it, and then they come back in there with a no-till drill, and it works good. But again, it's gonna cost some money going down that direction. So this is a Foodplot there for the buck salad. This is a great quality Foodplot mix. This is actually one of mine, what I call a staging plot. And what I mean by a staging plot, basically the woods behind here, there's about 160 acres of bedding. I don't ever go in there. I let those, and then further out here, I've actually got some pretty good sized agriculture fields. So what I do is I isolate, and there's a creek that runs through here. It's probably one of the best setups in regards to getting in and out and having a good quality hunt that I've got. But I let those deer work in through there. And as you guys can see, I've got some trees planted in there. But this Foodplot really brought those deer in there. It's a great location. And basically what I do is I'll hunt this in the evening only. I'll let those deer work their way from the bedding into here, and then after they get done eating in here, then they'll go ahead and move on out to the agriculture fields, which allows a lot of your deer to move on, and you can get out of your hunting location fairly clean. So this does have a lot of brassicas there, collars, you got your turnips, radishes, rape and kale, and this is a great food plot there. My daughter here, she enjoyed coming to check on this food plot on occasion, and as you guys can see, I believe this picture was in September, late September, and I planted this food plot August 17th of last year. I try to start my food plots on August 20th. Now, the great thing about a lot of these Nixa hardware food plots is you don't have to plant them, or you don't want to plant really any food plot super early. You know, a lot of people get ahead of the game and they get real antsy, and they're like, okay, well, I'm in July, I won't plant this stuff. And what ends up happening is if you get rain, you're going to have a good crop. But 90% of the time, you're going to have that drought period come through, and it's going to die off. You're going to have to start this whole thing over again, and you're just better off starting at least August 20th on into September to go ahead and plant your food plots. These food plots you can plant in the spring. The only time that I'll ever do that is if I am able to purchase another piece of property, or if I get a lease that they just never had food on there, and I want to really get a good inventory. That's when I'll come in here with some of these food plots and go ahead and provide additional forage, and start the process to get those deer used to having food plots on that particular piece of property. Now, the one thing you've got to keep in mind is you start providing a lot more food in the spring and summer months, you're going to have a lot more deer, and I mean does start making that ground family. So be prepared to start harvesting more does, because the more pressure you got on those food plots, the less those bucks are going to want to come in there, and for the large majority of people, they're after those antlers. All right, so here's a food plot I actually had up in Kansas last year, and as you guys can tell, the growth wasn't there to what I liked to have seen it, but we had a substantial drought up there on that particular piece of property. But as you guys can tell, this is about a two acre food plot there, and not only the deer, but also the turkeys and other wildlife are benefiting from this. I was sitting up in some of our blinds up there, just really washing and glassing and really enjoying going to give you a good estimate, but there is absolutely nothing that beats this very first one, okay? So, and this is the other one right here. This is a blue lab pen. These things, they're some money, but I absolutely love having this thing because maybe I forget. It's a lot easier for me to remember to bring this thing than to lose these. And this thing right here, it's a pH tester. Basically, you're just sticking that thing in the ground. This is glass right here, and there's solutions in there where you've got you calibrate it from 4 at first, and then you can do up to 7 on there, so that way you can kind of good the actual Blue Lab pen understands what your pH levels could be between. So, as you guys can see, at 6.7, this thing is actually pretty accurate based off what I've seen compared from here to these things right here. They'll range anywhere between $150 and $200 a pen. They warranty them, I think or not warranty, they'll last maybe a couple years in regards, but it's well worth the amount of ground that I've got to go ahead and punch that thing in there, and that way I know exactly how much line I'm going to need put on there. And then you've got your fertilizer maintenance there. We've got 3 different types, or 3 different parts of that fertilizer there. I'm sure you guys have looked in the fertilizer before, but you've got your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium there. Again, the soil test will help you on the pH there, but to understand the fertilizer, definitely look into your actual seed blends you guys want to be putting on there. That way it will definitely help you guys out in regards to how much fertilizer is going to be needed based on those food plots. So there's different ways of fertilizing your food plot. I know individuals that will go ahead and fertilize the food plot before they plant. I know, and with that works out okay, but your nitrogen on that food plot, if you do that, you'll actually lessen pretty quick. So basically that soil will take that nitrogen pretty quick, but if there's nothing that's growing, you're going to start losing that benefit there. One of a great way of doing it, especially if you don't have the time, or you're leaving that particular one, as soon as you broadcast that, or as you're broadcasting that food plot seed, go ahead and combine that food plot and your fertilizer. I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably done that before. I found that works out pretty good in situations where I've got to leave just so I can get that extra boost going when that next rainfall comes through. And then my number one thing to do is go ahead and wait. I like to get that first rain in there, let that growth come up there, 4 to 6 inches on that plant, then I'll come back through and fertilizer. And that's what I personally would recommend doing if that's available to you. I know that a lot of hunters, they travel some, or maybe it's out of state even. You just don't have the flexibility of saying, well, hey, the rain's there, and we got to get going. But that's another good one. But another kind of helpful hint, because a lot of these mixtures have brassicas. So brassicas require nitrogen, potassium, and then phosphorus. So if we're low on nitrogen, urea 4600, when you look at your fertilizer, that's what your urea is going to be. That's a great fertilizer to go ahead and get that extra boost in regards to getting those brassicas jump started, and you move on down. And then spraying, I talked about this briefly there at the start. 41% glyphosate, that should kill anything in that food plot that's growing, whether it's grass, weeds, whatever. Run that thing through there with any kind of sprayer you've got there. It works out very, very well. And then if you guys find yourself in a situation where you've got a lot of weeds and stuff in regards to your food plots, that's a good spray to look at, on some broadleaves, your brassicas, alfalfa, beans, peas, and also your clover food plots. So if you guys are getting into your spring food plots, or your turkey hunting, or you've got clover plots, just in general,